The first thing that hits you when a man like him walks into a cafe isn't fear. It's the way everyone suddenly remembers they have somewhere else to be. 1 second the place was full. Laptops open, spoons clinking, people pretending they weren't eavesdropping on each other's lives. The next, the air changed. Chairs scraped back too fast. Screens snapped shut. Conversations died mid-sentence like someone had cut the power. And he stood in the doorway like the reason. Not tall, not loud, not flashy, just inevitable. I didn't know it yet, but by the end of the night, I'd be the reason he survived, or the reason I disappeared. I saw the way the security guard near the condos across the street straightened like he'd been called by name. I saw the way my manager's smile froze on his face like it was glued there. And I saw the dark stains spreading under the man's coat as he took one step inside and paused, just long enough for everyone to understand. Whatever was coming, it was coming for him. His eyes found me behind the counter. Not the menu board. Not the exit.
Me.
And then he spoke, quietly, like we were the only 2 people left in the city. Per favor, he said.
Non farmi morire qui.
Please don't let me die here. My hands didn't shake until after I answered him. In Italian.
Non in casa mia, he whispered.
Not in my house. My name is Elena Rinaldi. I was 25 years old, broke in a way that doesn't feel temporary, and I made my money serving coffee to people who treated kindness like a subscription they could cancel at any time. I worked at Caffè Luna, a place meant to look cozy and romantic, tucked near the river where the rent was criminal and the customers acted like you should thank them for letting you exist in their line of sight. I wasn't brave. I was tired. Tired of watching my mother count pills like they were coins. Tired of landlords with rehearsed sympathy. Tired of being invisible until someone wanted something from me. So when the most feared Italian man in Chicago walked into my cafe bleeding through his coat, I didn't help him because I wanted to be a hero. I helped him because I understood what he said. And because I knew what it felt like to beg silently for one more chance. Stay with me. Because the night I spoke Italian out loud, the city's most dangerous man started looking at me like I was the only honest thing he'd ever found. And I didn't realize until it was too late that being chosen by a man like that is its own kind of risk. Caffè Luna wasn't a neighborhood spot. It was a stage dressed up as comfort, gold lights, small marble tables, a menu written in that curly font people trust for no reason. Hand-poured, small batch. Single origin. The kind of words that made rich people feel like they had a soul. They came in pairs and pretended they weren't on first dates. They came alone and made sure the laptop logo faced the room. They came with friends and talked loud enough for strangers to envy them. And I smiled through all of it because smiles were tips and tips were groceries. My manager, Drew, liked to say the cafe had a vibe. What he meant was, we were supposed to look warm so customers could feel cold inside and still want to stay.
Drew also liked me.
Not in a way that felt flattering. In a way that felt like standing too close to a heater you didn't turn on. Elena, he called that afternoon, leaning his elbows on the counter. After 6, you're on the private tables. Private tables meant the small back section we kept reserved, even when there was a line. It wasn't about reservations. It was about the men who didn't like hearing the word no in public. I wiped my hands on my apron. I thought Mia was on those. Drew smiled like I'd told a joke. Mia's too sharp. You're softer.
Softer.
Like a pillow. Like a thing you press your face into and forget is there. Softer doesn't mean stupid, I said quietly. His smile held. His eyes didn't.
No.
But it does mean easier. I kept my voice calm.
Sure.
Because rent was due in 11 days, and my mother had left a voicemail that morning that started with, "Don't get mad, but..." That's how emergencies enter your life when you're poor. Not with sirens. With apologies. I went back to pulling shots, letting the espresso machine hiss and spit. The heat rose into my face. The smell, dark and sharp and comforting, made me think of my grandmother. Nana Rosa had been the only person in my life who made me feel like I wasn't something people could bargain over. She'd raised me the first 5 years in a 2-bedroom in Queens while my mother worked nights and my father still existed, More rumor than presence. Nana spoke Italian the way other people breathed, without thinking, without translation, like it was the only honest language. When she died, my Italian started fading. But it never left. Not really. You don't lose a language your heart learned before your mouth did. If I'd known who else was already inside that cafe, I would have locked the door myself. That night, at 7:12 p.m., I was wiping down table 4 when Drew appeared behind me again. He said it casually, like he was talking about the weather. "They're coming."
Who?
I asked, though I already knew the answer. Drew's eyes flicked to the front windows. "The people we don't talk about." And the cafe, full a minute ago, shifted. Not all at once. Like a flock sensing a predator. Phones slipped into pockets. Voices lowered. A girl at the window kept looking out like she dropped something outside and couldn't stop hoping it would come back. Then I saw the first black SUV glide past the glass like a shadow. And my stomach dropped for a reason I couldn't name yet. The second SUV stopped. Not at the curb. Not in a parking spot. It simply stopped, angled in a way that blocked the street like permission didn't apply. People noticed. Pretended they didn't. Like noticing would make them involved. The cafe door opened. A gust of cold air came in, carrying the river smell and something metallic, like pennies, like rain, like blood. Then he stepped into the doorway. He wore a dark coat that looked expensive without trying.
No flashy logos.
No jewelry except a single ring, gold, worn smooth like it had lived on his hand longer than I'd been alive. His hair was black with silver at the temples. His face wasn't movie star handsome. It was carved. Like his life had been heavy and his bones had learned to hold it. 2 men hovered behind him in that quiet, predatory way, eyes scanning, hands near their jackets but not inside. And he didn't move for a second. He just stood there, letting the room take him in. Letting everyone decide instantly to shrink. I watched Drew's whole body change. His shoulders dipped. His smile reappeared, too eager, too bright. "Sir," Drew said, rushing forward. "Welcome." The man's gaze didn't touch Drew. It slid past him, like Drew was furniture. Then it landed on me behind the counter. Not because I was pretty. Not because I was standing still. Because I was the only one not pretending I couldn't see him. He took 1 step. And his coat pulled open just enough for me to see the dark stain on his shirt.
Blood. Fresh.
Spreading slow. A noise left my throat before I could stop it. A small inhale, sharp with surprise. The man's eyes narrowed a fraction. Like he'd heard a door open in a quiet house. He walked forward. Not fast. Not stumbling. Like pain was a private problem. Drew hovered beside him, babbling quietly. "We can close the cafe, we can—" The man lifted a hand. Drew shut up immediately. He stopped at the counter, so close I could smell him, expensive cologne layered over something harsher beneath it, something that reminded me of my father's toolbox and cold metal. He leaned in just enough that his men tensed. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. "Per favor," he said.
Non farmi morire qui. I stared at him.
It wasn't just that he spoke Italian. It was the way he said it. Not like a show. Like prayer. My hands moved before my brain finished panicking. I grabbed the bar towel, pressed it to the counter to steady myself, and answered without thinking.
Non in casa mia, Isaid.
Not in my house. The man's eyes widened by a millimeter. That tiny change did something to me. Like I just touched a wire and felt the current. Behind him, one of his men shifted, staring at me like I'd stepped into something I didn't understand. Drew let out a nervous laugh. "Elena, what?" The man didn't look away from me.
Hai detto casa mia.
"You said my house." I swallowed hard. My pulse hammered in my wrists. "This is my counter," I said, still in Italian, because it felt safer there. "Not your grave." A pause. Then, barely, his mouth curved. Not a smile. Something older. Something like recognition. He exhaled slowly and, for the first time, he looked tired. "Mi chiamo Luca Valenti," he said.
E qualcuno vuole che io muoia prima di mezzanotte.
My name is Luca Valenti, and someone wants me dead before midnight. My mouth went dry, because I'd heard that name before. Not from the news. From whispers. From the way people stopped talking when certain cars passed. Valenti. A name that made men straighten and women look away. Drew's face had gone the color of milk. Sir, we can call an ambulance. Luca's gaze flicked to Drew for the first time. It wasn't angry. It was final. No, Luca said in English now, like he didn't want any misunderstandings. You won't. Drew's lips parted, but no sound came out. Luca's eyes returned to me. You, he said softly. Do you have a back room? I hesitated. Every warning I'd ever learned started screaming at once. Don't get involved. Don't be a hero.
Don't speak.
Don't notice. But my mother's voice from that morning replayed in my head, apologetic, tired. And I realized something ugly. People like me never got saved. We just got told to be careful. So my answer came from somewhere quiet and stubborn. Yes, I said. And Luca nodded once, like he'd known I would. Bene, he murmured. Good. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping so only I could hear.
Se mi aiuti ti ricordar.
If you help me, I'll remember you. I didn't understand yet how dangerous that promise was. All I knew was the way my heart jumped like it recognized the shape of his attention. Some choices don't feel like choices. I still wonder what you would have done. And then one of his men moved, fast, sudden, locking the cafe door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was louder than it should have been, like a coffin closing. And that's when everyone inside realized they weren't just watching a story. They were in it. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I led Luca toward the back. People stared openly now, fear finally stronger than manners. A woman near the pastry case clutched her purse like it could protect her. A man by the window lifted his phone, then lowered it when one of Luca's men looked at him. Drew followed us, whispering, Elena, don't. I ignored him. The back room was where we stored syrup bottles and extra cups, and the cheap mop that never worked right. It smelled like vanilla and bleach. Luca stepped inside and shut the door behind him with a shoulder. The moment the door clicked, his control slipped just a little. He leaned against the shelves, jaw tight, breathing carefully through his nose. Blood had seeped through his shirt in a slow spread, darkening like ink. Whiter now.
Veta.
Sit, I said, and hated that my voice shook. Luca's eyes lifted.
Mi dai ordini?
Are you giving me orders? I felt my cheeks heat. If you want to bleed on my mop, be my guest. That almost smile returned. He lowered himself onto a chair like it hurt, but he refused to show it on his face. His man, older, with a scar near his eyebrow, hovered by the door. Rocco, Luca said quietly in Italian.
Nessuno entra.
No one comes in. Rocco nodded and stepped outside. Now it was just me and him. In the tiny back room, with the espresso machine hissing faintly through the wall like it was listening. I grabbed gloves from the supply shelf. My hands moved on autopilot because thinking would have made me run. What happened? I asked. Luca's gaze stayed on my face.
Un regalo.
A gift. I frowned. That's a weird word for getting shot. His eyes flicked down to my hands.
Sai cosa è successo?
You know what happened? No, I said, forcing honesty. I know what it looks like. I don't know why you came here. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then, softer,
Perché tu hai risposto.
Because you answered. My throat tightened. He didn't mean my words. He meant my willingness. He meant I'd seen him and didn't pretend I hadn't. I cut his shirt carefully with the café scissors. The fabric was expensive. My hands didn't care. Blood soaked the blade. The wound was on his side, just above the hip, ugly but not gushing. Still, it was deep enough to make my stomach turn. You need a hospital, I said. Luca's eyes sharpened.
No.
I looked up, because someone's waiting there. A pause. Then he nodded once. My skin prickled. How many people know you're here?
Troppi, he said.
Too many. I cleaned the wound as best I could, biting the inside of my cheek to keep my breathing steady. I'd learned how to do this in a different life, My mother's nursing textbooks scattered across our kitchen table, my hands passing her gauze while she cried quietly about tuition and time. Luca watched me with that unnerving stillness. "You're not from here," he said suddenly in English. I froze. "I am." He shook his head slightly. "Not Chicago." I didn't answer. My silence was an answer anyway. His gaze dropped to my wrist where a thin gold bracelet rested. Cheap. Worn. "Mine on Oz."
Chi te l'ha dato? He asked.
"Who gave you that?" "My grandmother," I said automatically in Italian, and the way the words came out made my chest ache. "She raised me." Luca's expression shifted. "Italian." I nodded. "From near Salerno. She came here when she was 17.
E tu parli.
He murmured, studying my accent.
Non come una turista.
"And you speak, not like a tourist." I kept working. "I don't use it much anymore." He made a sound, half disapproval, half understanding. "Some things," he said softly, "you should never let go." I didn't know why that sentence hit me like it did. Maybe because it sounded like regret. Maybe because his voice made regret sound expensive. If this moment feels heavy, it's because it was. I taped gauze across his side, tightening it carefully. He didn't flinch, but his hand gripped the edge of the chair so hard his knuckles went pale. When I pressed the final strip of tape down, I felt warmth under my palm. The gauze was already soaking through at the edges. That was the moment I should have walked away, and the moment I stopped being able to. "You're in pain," I said. "I've been in pain," Luca replied, like it was the same as saying he'd been to the grocery store. A beat passed. Then, through the wall, I heard Drew's voice rise. Nervous, fake loud. "Sir, people are asking questions. Maybe you should." I heard a second voice then.
Smooth.
Mocking.
Close.
And my blood ran colder than the coffee ever did. Because I recognized that voice. Evan Mercer. A regular who came in twice a week, always alone. Always smiling at the girls like he was doing them a favor. A man with money. With a watch that cost more than my car. With eyes that never looked away first. He'd once tipped me $100 bill and said, "Don't spend it on something boring."
Ides milat.
Because smiles were rent. Now his voice came through the wall, amused. "I just want to make sure everyone's safe," Evan said. "We heard there was trouble." Luca's head lifted slightly. His eyes hardened into something lethal. "Ah," he murmured in Italian, almost fond.
È lui.
"It's him." I stared. "You know him?" Luca's gaze cut to the door.
Non personalmente.
"Not personally." Then, quiet as a blade, sliding free.
Ma lui conosce me. But he knows me.
My heart thudded. Evan's voice rose again, closer now, like he was walking toward the back. "I'm sure we can handle this like adults," he said, almost laughing. "Chicago doesn't need drama." Luca leaned forward with a controlled breath. Then he looked at me, and the look in his eyes made my stomach drop because it wasn't a question. It was a calculation. "Elena," he said gently, like my name was something he'd been allowed to touch. And then in Italian, low, intimate.
Dimmi una cosa.
"Tell me one thing." I swallowed. "What?" He held my gaze.
Ti fidi di me?
"Do you trust me?" My mouth opened. No sound came out. Because trust wasn't something I gave strangers. And Luca Valenti was not just a stranger. He was a storm that had walked into my cafe and closed the door behind him. Evan's footsteps sounded just outside the storage room. And I realized I had maybe 3 seconds to decide what kind of person I was. The kind who backed away. Or the kind who answered. I didn't have time to think. I only had time to choose. So I nodded once. Not because it was smart. Because something in Luca's eyes told me the truth would cost more than a lie.
Bene, Luca whispered. Good.
Then he reached behind a stack of paper cups and pulled out something I hadn't seen him bring in. A small black pistol, wrapped in a cloth like it was precious. My breath caught. He watched my face carefully, reading me like I was a document. "You're scared," he said. "Yes," I said, honest. He nodded like he respected it. "But you're still here." Footsteps stopped at the door. A knock, too polite.
Elena.
Drew called. Open up. We have a guest. I forced my voice steady. We're inventorying syrups. There was a pause, then Evan's voice, smooth, amused. Inventorying. That's cute. My skin crawled. Luca leaned toward me, his voice barely a thread. Listen. He pointed to the shelves above the door, an old air vent. I need you to do something, he said softly. And you need to do it like you're bored.
What?
I whispered. His eyes held mine, dark and absolute. Open the door. My heart slammed. What? He didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. He just looked at me like he knew exactly what I was capable of, even if I didn't. And then, like a knife pressed gently against skin, he added, in Italian, Elena, as if the language itself could make me brave. So I lifted my chin, reached for the lock, and opened the door. Drew stood there sweating through his shirt. Evan stood behind him, smiling like this was entertainment. He was handsome in a clean, expensive way. Perfect hair. Perfect teeth. The kind of man who never carried his own bags. His eyes flicked over me, my apron, my messy ponytail, my hands still in gloves. Everything okay? He asked, voice warm as syrup. Behind him, two of Luca's men stood near the cafe entrance watching. Waiting. Not moving. Evan's gaze slid past me, trying to see into the storage room. I stepped into the doorway just enough to block the view. We're fine, I said. Evans smiled wider. I heard there was a man here who wanted coffee. I cut in because if I let him speak, he'd control the room.
Yes.
People want coffee. That's why we're here. Drew made a strangled sound like he wanted to apologize to Evan for my tone. Evan's eyes sharpened. You're acting weird. My pulse raced. Then Luca's voice came from behind me, calm, Italian, like a secret.
Digli che non c'è nessuno.
Tell him there's no one. I swallowed. And I did something I didn't know I could do. I looked Evan Mercer directly in the face and lied like it was my job. There's no one back here, I said, slow, bored. Just me and Drew and a lot of sticky bottles that no one wants to count. Evan's eyes held mine. Searching. Testing. Then he chuckled softly. You always were good at playing innocent. My stomach turned. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I like you, Elena, he said. Don't make me stop liking you. That sentence, delivered sweetly, was the most honest threat I'd ever heard. Behind Evan, someone shifted. A shadow moved at the edge of the cafe. And then, a crash. A chair thrown. A scream that finally broke the room's politeness. Everything exploded at once. Evan flinched, turning toward the noise. Luca moved. Fast. Silent. Like the air itself had been trained to get out of his way. He stepped behind me, one hand briefly on my waist, guiding, controlling, not quite a touch and not quite not. Then he was past me, into the cafe, gun low at his side. The entire room froze. Evan turned back just in time to see Luca Valenti fully. And Evan's smile died. Not because of fear. Because of recognition. Because he'd found what he came for. Luca's voice was soft, almost conversational. In Italiano, Luca said to Evan. Evan blinked. What? Luca tilted his head slightly. Parliamo come uomini, he said. Let's speak like men. Evan's throat bobbed. I don't. Luca's gaze cut to me for half a second. Then back to Evan.
Tu sì, Luca Said.
You do. Evan's eyes narrowed. Then he forced a laugh. This is insane. Luca stepped closer, blood still seeping under his bandage, and said something so quiet the whole cafe leaned in without meaning to.
Chi ti ha mandato? Who sent you?
Evan's jaw tightened. And in that moment, I understood something that made my skin go cold. This wasn't random. Evan wasn't just a creep. He was a message. Luca's men moved into formation around the cafe, like a closing net. Drew backed away, hands up, whispering, "Oh my God, oh my God." Evan looked around like he was realizing for the first time that money didn't always buy exits. Then Evan's gaze snapped back to me. And he smiled again. A different smile. The kind that says, if I'm going down, I'll take you with me. Elena, Evan said loudly, so everyone could hear.
Tell him.
Tell Luca why you're really here. My blood turned to ice. What? I whispered. Tell him about your father. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because I hadn't told anyone at Caffè Luna about my father. Not Drew.
Not Mia.
Not even my mother, not really. Evan's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Tell him, Evan pressed. Tell him your last name isn't Rinaldi. The room spun. I felt Luca's gaze slide to me, sharp, immediate. Not angry. Alert. Protective. Dangerously curious. Evan's smile widened. Go on, sweetheart. In Italian. Since that's your thing now. I opened my mouth. No words came out. Because the truth had teeth. And Evan knew exactly where to put them. Luca took one step back, eyes locked on mine. Elena, he said quietly. Che sta dicendo?
What is he saying?
My vision blurred at the edges. All I could think was, how does Evan know? And then Luca's voice cut through the panic, low and steady. Guarda me. Look at me.
I did.
His eyes held mine like an anchor. And I realized something terrifying. Luca Valenti didn't like surprises. And I was one. What Luca Valenti didn't know yet was that my father's name had once belonged to him. There's more to what happened after that night. Only if you want to hear it.